Welcome to the Live Big podcast, where real estate expert Nick Paynes shows you that everyone can build wealth through real estate investing. Nick and his featured guests will give you the tools, resources, and expert information you need to leverage real estate into a wealth-building strategy, so you can stop worrying about your 9-to-5 and start to live big. Here's Nick with today's episode.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Live Big podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nick Paynes, and today we're going to talk about some mortgage rate stuff. We're going to talk about past, present, future, and kind of dive into the profound impact that they have on buying power and the real estate market. We've talked about real estate trends based on mortgage rates. In the past, we've had a couple of lenders come in and talk to us a little bit about their take on it. Today, I want to talk about some of the data and how it actually affects our markets and our buying power. And I'm really passionate about this subject because there's a couple of things that are going to come up that I want to discuss about how people view their maybe recent purchases in the real estate market, and a lot of how people that bought during COVID and during kind of the peaky years of our market, how there's a lot of people out there with buyer's remorse, feeling like they overpaid for the property. And I want to change the perspective a little bit on that. So let's kind of get right into it, and we'll start with today's mortgage rates, and then we'll go into how they affect buying power. So to begin, let's kind of take a look at where mortgage rates are as they stand today. So as of today, today's October 9th, you'll be hearing this about a week and a half from now, so middle of October. The average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is nearly 8%. So fluctuates anywhere in the high sevens, but basically right around 8%. And so to put that into context, just a few years ago in 2021 and early 2022, mortgage rates were significantly lower, and they were averaging somewhere around the 3%, 3.25% rate. We even saw people down in the 2s with VA loans, with some of their FHA loans, and even with buying points on the mortgage, they were able to get their mortgage rates into the 2%. I do have one client, I think, with a 2.25% rate, which is just incredible. And so these historically low rates that we've had in the past, they can have a significant impact on the real estate market, and so can the drive up in real estate. Can the drive up in mortgage rates that we've seen since May of last year, since April of last year. So let's talk a little bit about the effect on buying power. So lower mortgage rates translate into lower monthly payments, obviously, which in turn increases the buyer's ability to afford more expensive homes. Okay, so consider this kind of, I'm going to give a couple of real world examples. So if someone was looking to purchase a $500,000 home with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, okay, and the rate is 8%, their monthly payment would be approximately $3,335, and that's principal, interest, and an estimated taxes and insurance here in Colorado. Okay, so $3,335. Okay, if that rate were 3% instead of 8%, nothing. If everything else were the same, taxes, insurance were exactly the same, the monthly payment would have been $2,086. It's a huge difference. It's around $1,250 per month. Okay, so the difference being at $1,250 is over $150,000 in buying power with today's rates. And with last year's rates, the 3% rates, it's over $250,000 worth of buying power. Okay, so let me put this into perspective. Okay, if all else were equal, taxes, insurance, everything, the monthly cost, and we're going to transition to principal and interest only. The monthly cost to get a $500,000 property today with a 20% down payment, okay, would be $2,935. Okay, so principal and interest only, it would be $2,935. Okay, to get that same monthly payment 2 years ago at an interest rate of 3%, you could have purchased a home for $871,000 with a 20% down payment. Okay. So the difference essentially would have been a loan amount of $400,000 versus a loan amount of $697,000. Okay. So all else being equal, don't even worry about the property, the down payment, anything like that. Okay. Now you would have to factor in, mortgage insurance if you were less than 20%. But if we don't think about the mortgage insurance, the difference in loan amount buying power is nearly $300,000. So $400,000 today to $697 a year ago, year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Okay. So for the crazy thing about this, just kind of overall perspective of looking at it this way, is that we had a lot of people. In fact, I think there was a report that came out, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but this report came out in 2022, late 2022, and then even early 2023, talked about the amount of buyers that had buyer's remorse for buying in the elevated market that we had during COVID in 2020, 2021, and early 2022. We had very low inventory at those times. Prices were driving up at record highs. Again, in early 2022, we saw prices, at least here in Colorado, increase in the first 4 months of the year by 16%. Okay. And we had a lot of people showing a lot of remorse, feeling like they overpaid for their home. They paid too much for their house, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so for all those people that are feeling that kind of remorse, I'd like you to kind of put it into a different perspective for yourselves, because I think you got something even more valuable than the house itself. You got cheap leverage, and that is the most valuable thing that we can look at. And I'm gonna go into detail here in a second and show you a couple of reasons why. So first of all, if you bought, again, a house at, let's reverse it and say you bought an $870,000 house during COVID, your qualifying power right now, or if you had the same monthly payment, you'd only be able to afford a $500,000 house right now. Okay. Prices have come down a little bit since COVID, but they have not come down that much. So the property that you're in, because you took advantage of this incredible mortgage rate down in the 3% range, you would not be able to afford that same property with today's mortgage rates. You would be looking at a much lesser property than what you're living in today. Okay. So that's issue number one. Okay. The other perspective to look at here is that on a 3% mortgage, okay, on a 3% mortgage rate of, again, I think of a $400,000 loan on a $500,000 property. Okay. The very first payment that you make on that property, okay, includes $686 in principal. Okay. On an 8% interest loan, the very first payment that you make includes $268 in principal. Okay. So it's significantly less than half the amount of principal that goes. So even if you have the same loan amount, okay, $400,000 loan amount, okay, you're paying off less than half as much if you have that higher interest rate at the beginning, okay? Because remember, all your interest in a amortized 30-year loan is front-loaded, okay? So you pay a lot of the interest up front, and then by the time you're to the back end of the mortgage 30 years later, that's when you're paying off the majority of the principal. Well, here's the problem with that. Most people don't own their homes for 30 years. The average American moves somewhere between every 7 and 12 years. So most people never even own their home long enough to get through a 30-year mortgage. The second piece of that is very few people carry their actual mortgage for 30 years. Either they pay it off early or they refinance at some point and it restarts that amortization schedule. Okay. So what we're looking at here is we need to look at this as from a perspective of a home buyer, or I should say a home owner that would be the typical American of owning their property for 7 to 12 years and then maybe moving up, selling that property and moving up. Okay. So in the instance of someone, let's say, living in their property for 10 years, okay, if you had a 3% mortgage rate, in 10 years, you'll have paid off about $100,000 worth of principal. Okay. It's right around $99,000. Okay. At an 8% mortgage rate in 10 years, you'll have paid off $51,000 of that original loan balance. Okay. So what happens with this really cheap leverage is it does two things. A, it makes our payments significantly more affordable. Okay. And the second thing it does is it allows us to pay off a lot more principal, thus gaining a lot more equity in our properties earlier on in the process in that 30-year mortgage. Okay. That allows us to move up and use that equity toward the new house. If you look at a property, if you look at this 8% interest rate, paying off $51,000 in 10 years, that's barely enough to afford the real estate fees, the title work, all that type of stuff to sell the home on the back end 10 years from now. You would have to rely only on the appreciation of the market alone to get money back out and move into your next property. Okay, so there's two things here. One, the payment that is significantly more affordable, and two, the amount of equity that we're building with every single payment that we make. Okay, so we're kind of burning the candle from both ends. And that's why I want people who maybe have that remorse of buying during COVID, like, oh, I paid way too much for my property, to look at this as I look back, I bought a couple of properties during COVID, and these properties, I feel so fortunate, and I'm so glad that I made those purchases. Even though I maybe overpaid for the properties, the leverage that I have on them is so cheap that it makes it so much more of a benefit than if I were to try to buy that same property today. Okay. So let's talk about the effect on the real estate market now. Okay. We already talked about what it does with buying power, and I hope you can see the significance in that buying power. It's massive. Okay. An increase from 3 to 8% is a massive difference in not only qualifying power, but the ability to pay off, gain equity in your home quicker. Okay. So the rates, the impact that the rates have on the real estate market, it obviously, I want to look at it on a broader scale. So historically, lower mortgage rates tend to stimulate demand for homes, right? And as more people enter the market because it's more affordability, more people can afford to buy. And what happens is home ownership gets to be in an all-time high, which we saw a couple of years ago, where really close to 70% of the population was homeowners. Okay. At the lows, it's about 60% of the population are homeowners. And that fluctuates over the last 50, 60, 80 years. It fluctuates between 30 and 40% renters and 60 and 70% homeowners. And it just depends on affordability. Okay. So we kind of hit that all-time high, and now we're kind of dropping back down and have less and less homeownership, and the rental market's, starting to boom. And so what happens is that heightened demand that we have, in addition to those really low rates, drives up home prices, and it creates a really competitive market. Okay. And this is what we've been seeing for the last decade. Okay. So now that rates are going back up, we should be seeing the reverse, right? Well, not exactly. So let me explain. When we saw the increase in home prices, if you look at increase in home prices for the last decade, okay, home prices have more than doubled. And there were some significant years in there where we saw, at least here in Colorado, we saw double-digit appreciation. That double-digit appreciation is really significant when they're back-to-back years, okay? And the biggest amount of pullback that we've had is really, it's kind of mind-boggling when we think about the buying power, effect that interest rates have had, in addition to the inventory problems that we have. We would think that we would see, I don't know, you would think that we would maybe see more of a change in the real estate market. But the absolute pricing peak here in Colorado that we had was right around May and June of 2022. Okay, we had that 16% run up to the beginning of the year. And our median home prices that we saw here our average home prices that we saw here in Colorado, our average sale price was $615,000. Okay. Now that we've seen rates go from 3 to 8%, which we talked about, decreased our buying power by $300,000. Okay. On an $800,000 property. So that's, 40% decrease in buying power. Okay. We've actually only seen home prices As of right now, that same average is 585,000. So home prices have dipped from 615 to 585,000, which is less than a 5% decrease in home prices since the absolute peak of our market. So how do we explain this, right? We've seen our decrease in qualification drop 30, 40%, but we've only seen home prices drop 5%. So how does that figure? Well, a couple of things. So first of all, we've talked about this many times on this podcast, but the lack of overall inventory. There's huge inventory problems across the entire United States and big inventory problems here in Colorado. So we still have this lack of inventory. So even with home prices very high here in Colorado and mortgage rates very high, we still only have 2.5 months worth of inventory. Generally speaking, we say a balanced market is around 4 months of inventory. It used to be around 6 months of inventory, but now we're calling it maybe 4 months of inventory is considered to be a balanced market. We're still not in a balanced market, even with mortgage rates is the highest they've been in nearly 30 years. So what ends up happening is we have these issues where the mortgage rates go up, okay, but the prices don't pull back because the inventory is still so low. So what happens is when mortgage rates go up, people kind of shelter in place, right? People that don't have to move don't move. People that want to move, they're just going to wait. They're going to sit on the fence and they're going to wait until there's a better rate opportunity to get in and move. But there is still real estate transactions happening all over the place. We have marriage, we have divorce, we have death, we have job transfers. There are still tons of real estate transactions happening. And so we still have inventory problems. We can't keep up with the inventory problems because there isn't a whole lot of new inventory, because the only new inventory that we're seeing right now is the new builds, which are way behind, okay? And the people that have to move. But the people that want to move, they're not putting their homes up for sale. So we've got a lot of sellers on the fence. They're like, I'm not moving. I'm not trading a 3% mortgage rate for an 8% mortgage rate. And I don't blame them, right? So inventory is low. So regardless of those mortgage rates, there are still people that have to move, and they're just coming to terms with those higher mortgage payments. The other thing is that people who are the new people, new home buyers that were not in the market a year ago, 2 years ago, they don't know that 3% mortgage rates ever existed, okay? And the reality is 8%, although it is a bit high, 6%, 7%, that's normal. The 3% mortgage rates were not normal. That's something historically that we had never seen. 6%, 7% mortgage rates are fairly normal. It just makes it really expensive when our home prices are high. So overall, these new buyers that are entering the market, think about the first home that you ever bought. You might remember your mortgage rate, but my question to you would be, do you remember the mortgage rates the year before you bought that home? I'm guessing the answer is no. When I bought my first house in 2010, I don't know what the mortgage rates were in 2009. I don't know what they were in 2008. I don't remember because I wasn't looking. It wasn't something that I even thought about. My head wasn't in the real estate realm in 2008. So I don't know what mortgage rates were at the time. So these people that are coming into the market, it's a different breed than the people that were coming in summer of 2022 that maybe started shopping in 2021 or even in early 2022. And they were pre-qualified or pre-approved at this really low mortgage rate. And then as they shopped and they got outbid and never got something, as the rates started to creep up, the sticker shock became a very real thing. Okay. And those people either eventually got into something at a much higher monthly rate than they were hoping for, or they just completely got out of the market and are no longer buyers. But we're far enough out from that increase in rates now that people don't really know any different. And those people are going to buy regardless. There will always be buyers. Okay. So there's one other thing that is affected by these mortgage rates, these high mortgage rates. So generally speaking, when we're in a low interest market, it spurs homeowners to refinance their existing mortgages. Okay. And when they refinance existing mortgages, a lot of times it can free up additional funds. They do cash out refinances. We can use home equity lines of credit. Okay. But it frees up funds for other investments or spending. So they can go out and buy a second home. They can go out and buy an investment property. Okay. And they're putting money back into the economy, right? So this has a total ripple effect on the economy. Right now, no one is refinancing mortgages. Okay. And so what we're seeing is kind of a lull in consumer spending and a lull in overall economic growth. And that's where this fear of recession comes in. People can't free up their funds. Even if they do have equity in the property, no one in their right mind is refinancing out of a 3% interest rate. And if they go into a home equity line of credit, which is another way to grab your equity that you have in the property, home equity lines of credit right now are in the 10% interest rate range. And so it's a very difficult thing to stomach. People going, wow, I'm going to pay 10% interest on the equity that I'm borrowing, right? So what we're seeing is just this overall economic lull because consumers can't access, at least cheaply, the money or the equity that's in their property. Okay. So I want to move into one kind of last topic here, and that's just talking about the kind of overall historical mortgage rates, and just to kind of get a deeper understanding of where we're at and the rates that we currently see versus historical numbers. So in the 1980s, mortgage rates like soared, and they were at like 18% due to really high inflation at the time. And in the 1990s, from that mortgage rate, they kind of slowly dropped down. And in the 1990s, we saw them in the 8s and the 7s. And by 2000, they were really relatively stable, and they were right around 6%. And then following the financial crisis, right? Like following the financial crisis in 2008, rates really dropped, and we saw them kind of as low as like 3.5% to 4%. They kind of creep back up in 2000 as we recovered in 2010, 2012. Rates creep back up kind of into that 5% range. And then they've just been dropping ever since. And once we hit COVID, to spur the economy to get people like in a better place during COVID, we dropped those interest rates all the way down and saw those 3 and even 2%, high 2% mortgage rates. And over the last year and a half, those rates have climbed significantly. The majority of that being just a recovery piece, right? We should have never been at 3 in the first place. We should have been at 5. And so that first 2% jump getting back to 5 is kind of a quick recovery. And this jump up to 8 is just a knee-jerk reaction to really high inflation that we have in the United States, and an attempt to curb some of what we talked about, which is what I just said about, stimulating the economy, creating economic growth. We're not in an economic growth phase. We need to not be in an economic growth phase. We need to have that recession. We need to cool things off a little bit to make things more affordable for the average person, right? So it's really essential to kind of recognize these historical trends and really understand how it shapes the real estate market. And so looking ahead as we try to understand what rates are going to do in the future, we can't obviously predict with like absolute clarity or certainty, but we can monitor the key economic indicators, and we can look at things like the Federal Reserve's policies, the inflation rates, and we can kind of make educated forecasts based on those, right? So traditionally speaking, the mortgage rates tend to follow the 10-year Treasury. And so when we see this 10-year Treasury and we see the spread between the 10-year Treasury and the mortgage rates, we know that historically speaking, there's about a 2% difference between those two. And right now we're sitting at about a 3% difference. So we expect to see mortgage rates pull back a little bit because of things like that. We also have an inverted yield curve between the 10-year and the 3-year Treasury. Okay, which means that the 3-year Treasury is paying better than the 10-year. Okay, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You would think if you invested your money for longer, you get a better yield, you get a better return. So as things start to come back to normal, we see rates coming down. And we talked about it earlier in the year on the podcast, and we said that maybe in Q2, maybe Q3 of 2024, we might see things come back. As we push later into 2023, we're not seeing the relief that we thought we would see as soon as we thought we would see it. So it's now realistic to think we might be towards the end of 2024, maybe even the beginning of 2025 till we start seeing some significant recovery. So those forecasts, if you like keeping up with that type of stuff, keep an eye on those economic forecasts and the Fed reserve policies and what the Fed talks about. And just know that mortgage rates and the treasuries, those tend to make reactions based on the predictions of what the Fed's going to do, not necessarily what the Fed is going to do. So when the Fed comes out and raises the interest rates, we don't really see the mortgage rates do a whole lot because they already knew it was coming. The markets already knew it was coming. It's when the talk comes. So, for example, Fed didn't move the rates in their last meeting, but they've talked about the fact that the next time they meet this month, they're going to move rates again. And the mortgage rates reacted negatively to that. So a lot of it's more based on speculation more so than it is the actual happening of the whatever the Fed decides or however the markets react. So I want to conclude our episode on that information today. Really, it's clear that mortgage rates play just an integral role in the real estate market, and they really have a significant impact on buying power. So if you're considering buying a home, it's really important to stay updated on the rates, and then make sure you're talking with your agent, with your lender, to understand and make some well-informed decisions, and take advantage of some of the great programs that are out there to help ease the pressure of these high interest rates. So thank you so much for joining in today. I hope you found this information helpful in your home buying or your home selling process or your investment journey. And hope you make it a great October. And we'll see you in a couple weeks in November. In the meantime, go out and live big.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Live Big podcast. For even more real estate and investment resources, go to blackyetigroup.com/resources and download Nick's complete guide to running your own rental properties. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, live big.
Live Big does not provide investment, legal, or tax advice, and nothing herein should be construed as being financial, legal, tax, or other advice. Live Big does not represent that any securities or services discussed are suitable for any investor. No investment or other decision should be made solely based on the contents or information found on the website or podcast. When making a decision about your investments, you should seek the advice of a professional financial advisor or qualified expert.